A single predator returned to a valley, and the rivers moved. Not the animals, not the trees. The rivers themselves changed course. That sounds impossible, but it happened. And the story of how a handful of wolves reshaped an entire ecosystem is one of the most extraordinary discoveries in modern science. The question is, how does a predator change a river? We will answer that, but first, you need to understand what the land looked like before they arrived. Yellowstone National Park, 1995. For 70 years, wolves had been gone. Hunted to extinction inside the park by the 1920s, the landscape had been left to recover on its own. It did not recover. Without wolves, the elk populations exploded. Thousands of elk roaming freely, eating whatever they wanted, wherever they wanted. And what they wanted was the riverbanks. The soft ground near water is rich with grass, willows, aspens. Easy food, so the elk stayed. They grazed the same strips of land over and over, down to bare dirt. The roots that held the soil in place disappeared. The banks crumbled. The rivers widened and became shallow and slow, choked with sediment. The valley was deteriorating, quietly, steadily, almost invisibly. And then, in January 1995, wildlife managers loaded 14 grey wolves into crates and drove them into Yellowstone. What happened next became one of the most studied ecological events in history. 14 wolves, in a park covering nearly 9,000 square kilometers. To look at the numbers, it seems insignificant, a handful of animals in an ocean of wilderness. But the wolves did not need to kill every elk to change everything. They only needed to change how the elk thought. Fear is a biological force. When prey animals sense a predator, they do not just run. They reorganize their entire lives around the threat. The elk of Yellowstone had spent 70 years without fear. They had forgotten what it meant to be hunted. The wolves reminded them. Almost immediately, the elk stopped lingering in the open valleys and along the riverbanks, the places where wolves could easily surround them. They moved. They kept moving. And in the places the elk abandoned, something remarkable began to happen. Within just a few years, the vegetation along the rivers began to return. Willows, aspens, cottonwoods. Plants that had been cropped to stubs for decades suddenly had a chance to grow. In some areas, willow trees grew to 5 times their previous height in under a decade, and those trees brought others. Songbirds returned, nesting in the new growth. Beavers, who depend on willows for both food and dam-building material, came back to rivers where they had not been seen in years. The beavers built dams. The dams created ponds. The ponds slowed the water, creating wetland habitat for otters, muskrats, ducks, and fish. One predator, dozens of species responding in a chain. Scientists have a name for this kind of effect: a trophic cascade. When a predator at the top of the food chain changes the behavior of the animals below it, those changes ripple down through every layer of the ecosystem. Plants, insects, birds, fish, and eventually the physical landscape itself. But here is where the story becomes almost unbelievable. The rivers actually changed shape. As the vegetation returned along the riverbanks, the roots locked the soil in place. The banks stopped crumbling. The rivers stopped widening. With stable banks, the rivers began to narrow and deepen. The water moved faster and cleaner. The channels carved new paths, literally altering the geography of the valley floor. The wolves did not touch the rivers. They never went near most of them. But by changing the behavior of the elk, they changed the plants. The plants changed the soil changed the water, and the water changed the shape of the land. A predator, reshaping rivers, through fear alone. The biologist who first described this process in Yellowstone was William Ripple, a researcher at Oregon State University. He and his team began noticing the changes in vegetation patterns in the early 2000s and traced them back step by step to the wolf reintroduction. Their research, published in 2012, described the trophic cascade and introduced the phrase that has since become famous in ecology: the landscape of fear. The landscape of fear describes how prey animals mentally map their environment according to where predators might appear. High-risk zones get avoided. Low-risk zones get overused. Remove the predator, and that mental map collapses. Every inch of the landscape becomes equally accessible, equally exploited. Bring the predator back, and the map rebuilds. Animals avoid certain zones, those zones recover, and everything connected to them recovers too. The wolf reintroduction did not just change the rivers. Grizzly bears benefited. The recovering berry bushes along the riverbanks gave them a richer food source before hibernation. Bald eagles and ravens followed the wolves, feeding on the remains of kills. Scavengers that had been absent or rare began returning to areas where wolves now hunted. The rivers, now cooler, deeper, and shaded by the returning trees, became better habitat for fish. Trout populations in some areas increased significantly, from 14 wolves. It is worth saying that again. The recovery of an entire ecosystem, rivers, trees, bears, eagles, fish, cascading from the reintroduction of 14 animals. Today, Yellowstone's wolf population numbers in the hundreds, spread across multiple packs. Their territories overlap, their hunts keep the elk moving, and the valley continues, slowly, measurably, to heal. Yellowstone is not unique. Around the world, scientists are finding the same patterns wherever large predators have been lost. Coyotes removed from an area, small mammals explode, ground-nesting birds collapse. Sharks overfished, ray populations surge and devastate shellfish beds. Sea otters gone. Sea urchins multiply and destroy kelp forests. Every ecosystem has a predator at its top, and when that predator disappears, the entire structure below it can unravel, slowly, quietly, until the riverbanks crumble and the valley goes silent. The wolves of Yellowstone did not change the rivers because they are exceptional. They changed the rivers because they were there, doing exactly what a top predator is supposed to do, keeping everything else in balance. So, how does a predator change a river? Not with force, not by digging or damming or redirecting the water, by creating fear, by making prey animals move, by giving the land a chance to breathe. The rivers moved because the wolves returned, and in the bends of those rivers, in the roots of the willows, in the nests of the songbirds, you can still read the shape of their influence. Nature does not need to be saved, it needs its architects back. If you want more stories about the hidden forces shaping the natural world, subscribe. Every week, we go deeper into the science behind the creatures that run this planet. Next time, the ocean has its own architects, and they are far older and far more dangerous than any wolf.